chambers, 2 styles, and the stamens are equal to the petals in number. And the fruit basically looks like an eyeball, 2 eyeballs on a stick, like this. All right. Also, they belong to the madder family, which is the Rubiaceae, along with coffee. Okay, there you go. I hope the USDA Forest Service does not sue me. Okay, what makes the genus challenging to me is that there are so many species, 151. No, there's 10 native to Minnesota and 2 introduced. They're often encountered, in fact, typically encountered without flowers or fruits. They are similar looking species occupy different habitats. And again, we're trying to identify species based on their characteristics and not necessarily by their habitats. And so there's a great range of wetland indicator statuses, ranging from FAC up to 2 or 3 of them are out again. So we want to know how to identify our galliums of that. So forget how I have. Okay, so this is our vocabulary. Number of leaves per whorl, the number of prominent veins on the leaf. That can narrow it down substantially. What kind of pubescence you have on the stems, what kind of pubescence you have at the nodes, your general leaf shape, and the pubescence of the leaf and the tip of the leaf, and the number of petals on the flowers. So this is again your basic vocabulary as you dive into this genus. I'm going to start with the introduced species. Both of these are basically relegated to just a couple of counties in the Arrowhead. So they probably found their entry through the Duluth Harbor, as a lot of invasive species have done. So this is Gallium Theorem, the one true gallium. It is the only one in Minnesota with yellow flowers. So if you see the flowers, you're home free, and you know it's a gallium. Yellow bedstraw, I think it's used medicinally, so please go out and over-harvest. The leaves are 8 to 12 per whorl, so there's only a couple of species with that many leaves in each whorl, so this is one of them. The leaves are very unique in that they are very linear, they're very glossy, they end in a very sharp bristle with margins that we call revolute. So this is pretty, even if you saw this without flowers, you should be able to identify it. The plant is upright, erect, and the stems are fuzzy. It's the only species found in our state with yellow flowers. So it has the potential to be invasive. This second one can be a little harder to identify because it looks like some other ones. This is Gallium relugo, again used medicinally, false baby's breath. This one has 6 to 8 leaves per whorl. The leaves have forward-facing hairs. So the directionality of the hairs on the margin can actually help you out in identifying lookalike galliums. So these ones sort of face forward. And it too is bristle tip. It tends to sprawl from it's a sort of a clump, and then it'll sprawl, and then at the very end it will sort of arch up. It is non-native, potentially invasive, and it's found mostly in northeastern Minnesota. The next group I sort of set aside because these ones are easy to identify because they're the only ones that don't have just a single primary vein. So these have 3 to 5 primary veins. They don't look all alike, so you're not going to confuse them with each other. But once you realize that there's only one with, there are only 2 species with 3 to 5 principal veins, it narrows it down considerably. Gallium borealo probably, is probably the most common one in our entire state. Northern bedstraw. The leaves are variably hairy, so it's The tip is blunt, so that's something you want to make sure you look at. The stem, again, the hairiness of the stem can be variable as well. It can either be smooth or sort of stiffly fuzzy. It has an upright habit. It grows to 1 meter. Once it flowers, like half the plant is flowers. So you're going to have a big flower cluster at the top and very dense. The fruits, when the fruits come, they don't have any like bristly or hooked hairs on them. That's another diagnostic trait for some of them. So there are 3 or 4 species with armed fruits, bristly fruits. Gallium circascens, has anyone actually been lucky enough to see this in the field? Anyone? I think it's rare in Minnesota and it's increasingly rare. I think it's found in 1 county in the driftless area. It's called forest bedstraw or wild licorice. I haven't seen this either. But you would never mistake this, right? Maybe for another genus. But it has 3, sometimes 5 principal veins. The leaves are much broader than any other bedstraw you'll encounter. The tip is, pretty, I mean, it comes to a point, but it's not like, it doesn't have a bristle. Neither of these species has a bristle tip. It's very hairy throughout. And the flowers are different from the other flowers in being sort of translucent greenish. So one of these days I'll make a trip to the driftless area and find this species. Anyway, you can see how tremendously fuzzy it is. Again, as most upright species have more decidedly 4-angled stems. And this one's one of the upright species. And here's your flower, sort of pretty green thing. Okay, so these are the ones with 3 principal veins. Again, you can mark those off, check those off your list if you see that characteristic. Okay, the really sticky galliums. So these are the ones that will go home with you. And the first one is Gallium apparani. I don't know, I see this a lot as a sort of like an urban weed or sort of a marginal area weed. These are usually 8 per whorl, but sometimes as few as 6 and as many as 12, but 8 is sort of the number you're going to rely on. The leaves are pretty distinct in being decidedly spatulate in shape, meaning they're not just the widest above the middle, they're widest well above the middle, close to the top of the leaf. And it's really the only one with that marked spatulate shape. And they are bristle-tipped. The fruits are armed with hooked bristles, and it's the only tap-rooted annual in this entire genus. So you're unlikely to extirpate a whole population if you yank it up and see if it's tap-rooted. So feel free to, okay, and again, one of my images, this is why I relied on other people. And again, you can see this really sharp or really decidedly spatulate shape, narrowly spatulate. And what's the other one? The other really sticky one? Asperellum, you're good. Why did you come up with this? Yeah, Gallium asperellum, the other A, right? Okay, this is rough bed straw, and it's rough. It has 6 leaves per whorl, but 4 or 5 on the branches. But on the central stem, it'll have 6 per whorl. The leaves are more or less elliptical. Again, the tip is bristled. Definitely not as long. The leaves are not as long as Gallium asperellum. It sprawls and branches and creates tangles, and I don't know, I think I've probably even fallen on my face going through sort of dense, rough bed straw. The fruits here are smooth as well. Again, you can see that the flowers are a little bit sort of dichotomous, dichotomously branched. Both species have bristly hairs lying downward along the stem. So downward towards the base of the stem, and facing backwards, again, towards the base of the leaf, along the leaf margins and the underside midvein. So that's reliable, that's consistent, and it can help you in in distinguishing it from other species. Because the problem with these is too often you see just one plant, right? As you're doing field work, you see one plant, or it's not mature, and so you think you know what it is, but it's, depending on that range of variability, it could be, I don't know, it could be Gallium Theorem or something like that. So you want to be ready and willing to look at these finer points when you have to. Okay, so these are the other species with 6 leaves per whorl. Reliably 6 leaves per whorl on the main branch. On the left we have Gallium Theorem, which is one that's really common to us. This is another one that's found statewide. You see this all the time. Sweet-scented bedstraw. I've never really detected the vanilla scent that's supposed to come from this one. Has anyone? No? Okay. The bristly hairs on here lie downward on the stem, but they lie on the stem like as in with Apirini and Scarlet. But the leaves on the margin of the leaf, or the hairs on the margin of the leaf, go upward and not downward. But they do tend to go downward on the midvein. So part of it's up, part of it's down. There is a bristle tip. You can see that on a typical species, and you're not always going to be lucky to find a typical specimen, you'll see that that it's more elliptical to ovate, the leaf shape here. And the fruit is armed with hooked bristles. What's something you notice here a lot, and I think this is why a lot of people are able to identify this just like from a distance, but again, there's a certain gestalt to this species in that the inflorescence is 3-branched and the flowers occur in 3s, so it has this sort of tetrahedral look as you encounter it in the field, and you see that that's just sort of distinctive. You see that here, you see that here. So I do tend to recognize this quicker than I ought. Gallium consinum, shining bedstraw. I've only seen this a few times. It has 6 leaves per whorl, 4 on the branches. No consistent stem hairiness. The surface tends to be a little shiny. What's distinctive about this one is that the inflorescence is sort of open and lacy, and often abundant, but it's not going to look like dense, like Gallium Theorem or Gallium boreala. It's going to look, you'll see that there's a lot of flowers, but they're sort of spreading in open inflorescence. And the fruit there is smooth when it finally comes to fruit. Here you go again, sort of narrowly elliptical leaves. There is usually a short bristle on the tip of the leaf, but sometimes it can be blunt. And here you can see sort of the airiness or the delicacy of the inflorescence. Galliums with 4 leaves per whorl and 4 petal flowers. So we have 2 species that have 4 leaves per whorl, more or less, but it's quite variable, and 4 petal flowers. Gallium obtusum, which from the name has a blunt tip, there's no tip, there's no bristle at the tip. There are usually 4 leaves per whorl, but 5, 6, and 3 are also seen. I think I've observed in the field that it tends to have 5 per whorl after the point up the stem when it starts branching. That's when you can see 5 per whorl. The leaves can be as long as 3 centimeters, and they tend to be angled upward. Another odd thing about this species is it has smooth fruits. So, but every now and then you're going to see on this species more than on any others, sort of a lopsided fruit, where one of the capsules is a lot bigger than the others. Here on the right side is Gallium labradoricum. This is a wetland obligate. It has the smallest leaves. The leaves will never be more than like a centimeter and a half in length. Once they expand, they tend to droop a little bit here. These are not white flowers here. These are the reddish ovaries getting ready to fruit. This species also has the flowers in groups of threes, but sort of less decidedly sort of tetrahedral than Gallium triflora. But this droopiness in the middle of the bog is pretty diagnostic. Both species have mostly smooth stems, but where you're going to look for hair is right under the whorls at the node. That's, there may be some hair along the stem, but the angles aren't going to be prickly or sharp in any way. And the leaf tips are blunt and lacking bristles. And I think the last group I have here is the galliums with three-petaled flowers. So if you see them in the field with flowers, it's really easy to narrow them down. But you sort of have to wait. Without flowers, they can be really hard to tell from each other. In fact, for me, it's impossible to tell them apart. Gallium trifidum, which is northern three-lobed bedstraw. The flowers are, and then we have southern three-lobed bedstraw. So both have a variable number of leaves per whorl, often 4 to 6. The leaves have stiff hairs on the margin and are blunt-tipped, not sharp at the tip. The flowers have 3 petals, and the fruits are smooth or with short hairs. The difference is what I'm going to show you here. This is what you have to look for in order to tell them apart. The fruits on here are going to be on bristly, I don't know what to call them, peduncles, bristly peduncles that are longer than a centimeter, and they tend to arch at the very end and droop at the very end. On Gallium tinctorium, the southern three-lobed bedstraw, this peduncle will be a centimeter or less and will be more or less straight. And this is what I have to look for in order to tell these two species apart. If someone has other characteristics that you can do, that you know to tell them apart before they go to fruit or flower, let me know, send me an email, or tell me now. Again, you can see that bristliness of the peduncle even before it goes to fruit and starts drooping. There you have this bristly peduncle. So great. Okay, so galliums, again, it's well represented in Minnesota. Let me see, we have 4 species that are found more or less statewide: Variety boreala, obtusum, and triflorum. A lot of the rest are sort of concentrated in the narrow arrowhead, but 9 of these species are ones that you're likely to see. 9 of the 10 native species are ones that you're likely to see in the east central area of the state, heading into the north metro. And some of these are found in the southwest part of the state as well, especially the ones that are found statewide. You know, I've gone on for a long time, and I have 2 more groups, but we're not going to get to all of this. At this point, are there any questions? The next group I'm planning to cover are the Solomon seal. Then I think I'd like to take is it all right for me to take like a 5-minute break? And then dive back in, because this is like, I don't know. I mean, I'm a plant geek, but this is like a lot of, a death march through difficult genres. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll start again in like 5 minutes. So.